Hey everyone, there are loads of different ways we can go around and paint rust and corrosion, things like that onto our metallic areas on our models. Some of these unfortunately do require either specific products or they require being built into the painting stages. But what if you're in the situation where you have a bunch of metal areas, say shields, weapons and things like that, that you want to take from a silver, shiny, bronzy, metallic that they are now and move them into a nice rusted, corroded type of metal? Well, don't worry, today we've got 5 tips and methods that we can use in order to achieve that. And I really do like the last one in order to get large batches of seriously corroded items like shields and weapons all sorted, ready for the tabletop. Conveniently, I have a set of shields here that we can use for this demo, pre-painted in different styles of metallics. And we are going to be starting off the first of the list with the good old-fashioned layering. And here we are going to be needing to get a couple of different colors. And this method will generally work best on silver sort of metallic areas, ones that tend to rust in a browny orange tone. We will want to be starting from a nice dark reddish brown, and we're going to want to thin this down in order to make a nice glaze. We can then go around the areas on the model that we want to be rusty and map out these areas with this darker reddish brown. This will give us a nice range of staining, which can then be followed up with a layer of light orange brown. We are going to again thin this in order to make a nice glaze, and then we can use this and target mainly the center areas of the darker brown that we've done in order to brighten up those areas of rust. But do bear in mind that we want to try and maintain a semblance of randomness when applying this. By taking these browns, going around and mapping out all of the areas of rust that we want, we get that nice replication and imitation of rust on a metal area where there's been an initial imperfection that has started to rust, and then that spreads out slowly from that area. We're going to be replicating that with these browns, so we've got the darker brown for the widest area, getting brighter and brighter as it goes to the center. And for that center area, we are going to be using very similar techniques, but as I'm sure you can think and imagine, we're going to be coming in with a orange for these next steps. And this is to give us that typical orangey color that we expect from rust. As before, we are going to want to water down this color. However, we don't want to thin it down to a watery glaze consistency as we did the others. And that's because we want to be able to put down a decent amount of color in a single or only 1 or 2 passes, ensuring that we get a nice tonal shift without needing to come back in and reapply the paint multiple times, like we would with a glaze. Now, once that is applied, the rust areas are essentially all sorted, but we can do one more step in order just to tie this in with the initial pre-painted area a little bit more. And what we're going to do is add a little bit of chipping to all of the areas by taking the initial silver metallic that we used on that metallic area and then come in and put a few spots of silver and areas of chipping. So the areas that we're going to be targeting mainly is going to be things like corners, edges, and any areas that you think would get heavily impacted. Naturally, we have the option to vary the amount of rust we do on any particular area as much as we want. We can either make it really, really rusty, or we can only put rust in particular choice areas. And that's the advantage of using this layering technique of going in, glazing and layering it up. We can be very specific on where the paint is going to be applied onto the model. The next technique we're going to be doing is not quite the same. It's going to be using the same color range and the same color palette essentially, but we're going to be using a different product application, and that is some of this foam. Well, not this foam, this is my foam, so you're going to have to go and get your own foam. But any foam is essentially good. So once you've got your foam, let's carry on. We are going to want to take our chosen and acquired foam and then pluck a small amount of it off of the main block and affix it to a handle, or potentially grab it with tweezers. Then what we can do is dip this sponge into the first paint of our choice, which is going to be the dark reddish brown. Before we actually apply that to the model, sponge pressed to model, we are going to want to dab or remove a fair amount of the paint from the sponge that we've made. Once we have gone round and we're happy with the placement of the darkish brown that we've applied, we can then come in and essentially rinse and repeat with our lighter brown, going around dabbing all of the areas before we finally grab our orange tone and come in and do the last round to give us that punch of color that we expect from a rusty area. As with the layering technique, we can then finish off this method with a round of silver. Here we have an option to either use edge highlighting and essentially dotting it with a brush to give us a further amount of control, or we can carry on using the foam, dipping the foam in some silver, and then applying it to the model to represent the chipping. That brings us on to the third option, and this is kind of a combination of the previous two, as well as adding in an extra step and a extra product. And what we're going to be using for this one is actually some oil paints. And I know that there are a fair few people that don't like using oil paints, either because they have to go out and buy them to add them to their collection, and they don't know how particularly to use them, or they think they're going to be very, very expensive for what they are. And believe it or not, it's not that bad. You can go out and pick up some oil paints in a pack of 12 or 20 for around £5. So I appreciate that that can be expensive in some hobby budgets, but for something that's going to last you probably most of your miniature painting hobby at least, it's not too bad. It's a bit like the subscribe button. It doesn't cost much and you get a lot out of it. So that's what we're going to be using here, and let's jump in and see how it's done. To start off, we can begin as we did when doing the layering technique. However, here we are going to be starting off a shade lighter. So we can start by applying a thinned down coat all over the areas that we want to be rusty, using the light orangey brown tone that we have. Then what we can do is follow this area up using a sponge from our second method. And what we're going to do is actually sponge on some orange acrylic. This can be lightly dotted over all of the areas that we want rusty to give us that nice touch of orange across the area. Once that is all dry and completely sorted, it's time to pull out the oils. And what we're going to be doing is using this to represent rust that has been washed off of the main surface and then pulled into any of the recesses. And we can achieve that by diluting the oil paint in a little bit of thinner so that we get a consistency similar to that of a Games Workshop wash, and then apply this over the most corroded areas and drop it into the recesses on the rusted area of the metal. And if we go a little overboard at any point, it's not a problem. Because it's oils, it does take a while to dry, so we can just come back in with a clean brush and start to pull all that paint back, giving us a little bit of time to fix any issues we may have. Now, oil paints can take a little while to dry fully. They're normally touch dry, depending how much you thin them, within about 24 hours, if not sooner. However, they can take quite a while to dry, actually dry, fully cured without any issues. So if you're going to be playing with them quite quickly, it might be worth potentially going in and varnishing them once they are mostly cured. It shouldn't overly affect it, though your mileage may vary. However, you can just leave them out and they will dry over time, and then all of the oil pigments will have evaporated away and we're left with just the color pigments. But while we're talking about oils, why not swap out this orange and let's go from doing a silver metal rust and we can get a nice turquoisey blue color and go and rust some bronzy areas and give them a nice patina. And this patina method is nice, short and sweet. We're going to be using oil paints, which as I said, are great for this option because they give us a nice amount of working time, a strong amount of pigment, and we can do this in a simple wash. What we're going to do is thin down our turquoisey blue with some thinner and then apply this all over the area that we want to have this patinary rust effect. What this will do is slightly tint all of the areas in a blue hue, but the recesses will start to collect and pull the color more. This will then show up a lot more once it is dry. If there are any areas that we think are too densely covered or not covered enough, thanks to this being oils, we can go back in and tweak it. We can either apply another wash targeting particular areas, or pull back any colors we think are a little bit too strong. And that's essentially it. We just need to let the pigments and the oil wash dry, and once it is, we have a really nicely looking corroded bronzy gold shield or metal area. And the advantage of just doing this all over wash is we get the general pitting and wear that you would get across these areas of metal over the whole thing from where the pigment has actually settled on those areas. But obviously they've pulled more into the recesses, which is where moisture and things like that would pull and would do more corrosive damage. So we get a nice amount of wear across the area, as well as getting that nice color contrast between the turquoisey rust that we've applied, as well as the bronzy coppery gold that we were using as the actual metallic area. Once that's all dry, we're good to go. That does mean that we can then come in once it is dry and apply all of the chips and things that we can do to make it tie it in a little bit more by taking our base coat metallic and applying it over the top. But then that leaves us with just one more method to do some rusty shields or rusty metal. And this one is one that I do enjoy doing. I think it's very easy, very quick to do, though we do need a specific product similar to the oils, except this time we're completely getting rid of the oil and we're going for just the pigment, and we're using pigment powder. And this can be used to make really corroded areas really quickly and easily. And using these can vary in different ways, but we're going to use a nice simple method. And what we're going to start off with is mixing our chosen color of pigment, in this case a nice rusty orange, and we're going to mix that in with some clean, clear water. What this will do is make a nice sort of slurry, which is the color of our pigment. Then what we can do is either carefully apply this nice slurry to set areas that we want rusted, or if we want everything really corroded, we can slap it all over everything. Once we have our chosen areas covered in this paste, we're going to wait a very short period of time, literally a couple of seconds once we've applied it. And then what we can do is start to wipe away most of the pigment powder. We can do this using a very soft sponge that isn't going to leave threads and hairs everywhere. Once this has dried and the water has evaporated, it is semi-firm, but there is a chance that it may come loose. So if this is just going on display, we don't necessarily need to touch it from this point. However, if it's for a gaming piece and it's going to be moved about, we can fix everything in place by applying a quick coat of contrast medium, applied very lightly in order not to disturb any of the powder. And what this will do is, once dry, is set that powder in place while maintaining the look we want. And it's as simple as that. For option number 5, just leaving it to dry. We can naturally go in after the fact once it is dry, the same as every other shield here, and essentially add some chipping, going in and taking a metallic, dotting that in and catching some corners, just to tie the rusting in with the rest of the elements if we wanted to take that time. Otherwise, we are essentially good. We can stack all of these elements onto one thing if we want, spread them across a unit, or use them however we want. For example, this shield, we've got a coppery patinaed main body with some silver securings around the edges, so we're able to make the silver bits rusty in different ways, as well as patina the copper and give it some nice blue contrast. Beyond that, if you did like this video, you might actually like the video where we painted the shields that we used for the demo in this particular demo. So what I would actually suggest is seeing how we paint those silvers by checking out this video here. Otherwise, remember to subscribe so that we can see you next time.